Hi, welcome back. Today I want to talk to you about something called voting issues. Now, before we get started, I want to first let you know that unlike most of the other videos on my channel, this is not really a beginner's video. It's intended more for intermediate or advanced debaters who are looking for advice as to how to run voting issues. If you are a novice debater or you don't even know what voting issues means, that's totally fine. But I'd say that you probably don't have to worry about this specific topic right now. And it's probably a good idea to skip this video and come back and watch it later when you have more experience. That being said, if you are an intermediate or advanced debater and you want to learn how to effectively use voting issues, then go ahead and keep watching. Now, first off, what are voting issues? When I say voting issues, what do I mean by that? Well, the way I like to think about them is that they're very similar to contentions, except that whereas you present your contentions in your first speech during your case, voting issues are usually presented at the end of the round, usually during your last rebuttal. And what they basically are is there are 3 to 4 points in your very last speech that just basically summarize why, after all the arguments that have been made in the debate, you should win the round. We'll look at an example a little later. Now, you may be wondering, why would you want to do this? Well, the point of voting issues, at least in my mind, is to make the decision easier for the judge by boiling or simplifying the round down into just the main primary reasons why you believe your side should win. Or in other words, why your arguments have trumped your opponent's arguments. And that's why these are called voting issues. If you take the words voting issues and dissect them, voting issues are the main issues that the judge should vote on to determine the winner of the round. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, oftentimes your judge is someone who isn't very familiar or well-versed in debate. It might be a community judge who's never participated in a debate round before, or even if it's a parent judge who has some experience, they may not be as familiar with everything as you. They may be feeling overwhelmed looking at all the arguments they've written down on their flow at the end of the round, if they even flowed at all. And they'll just kind of be confused trying to make sense of all the different arguments to determine who won, and they won't really know how to do that. This happens very often. By you using voting issues, what you are doing is simplifying the round so that the judge doesn't have to worry about the, say, 12 different arguments that they heard over the last 45 minutes. Instead, they just need to consider the 3 simple arguments that you are presenting in your last speech, which conveniently point to why you are the side that won. So how do you come up with your voting issues? A helpful way I found to think about voting issues is to just ask the question, if I could only make 3 arguments to the judge as to why I should win based on the round, what would they be? Or another question to ask is, if I only had 10 seconds to argue to the judge why I should win the round, what are the points I would make? And then take what you would say and basically put those into 3 points, and those become the taglines of your voting issues. Now, it's very important when doing this to prioritize your arguments. During a round, you'll often have a bunch of arguments that, when you look at the big picture, don't actually matter that much, and some arguments that are fundamental to your position or to destroying your opponent's arguments. So, for example, a lot of times in LD rounds, you'll have definition debates, and sometimes these definition debates are useful and you need to figure out the definition because it has a big impact on the round. But a lot of times, you're just kind of arguing for the sake of arguing, and you might step back and realize, wait a second, it doesn't matter which definition we use, it doesn't really change anything. If that's the case, that argument shouldn't be a voting issue because it doesn't matter. It has no impact on things in the round. So you really need to look at the impact of these arguments. Say that you're debating the value clash and you have 2 completely different values, and whatever value you take completely changes the outcome of the round. That would be a high impact issue, and that is something that I would probably make a voting issue because it's so important. So the voting issues should focus on those high priority arguments, and the non-high priority arguments, they aren't actually even that important to winning the round. And it's even okay to drop a few of them and to let them flow to your opponent if they don't matter. And if dropping a few unimportant arguments means you can spend more time and focus on your priority arguments, your high priority arguments, that is a very good thing and a good strategy. So remember, with voting issues, the point is to simplify and boil down the round to make it more simple and less complicated for the judge to make their decision. How many voting issues should you have? Personally, I would usually aim for around 3 or 4 at max. 2's fine too, or even 1 if the round really boils down to a central issue. But usually you'll have like 3. I wouldn't have too many more than that, and because at that point it gets too overwhelming. And remember, the point of this is to simplify the round, so you can't really do that if you have too many voting issues. So now let's get even more specific and talk about how to actually do this and what this looks like in a round. How should you structure your voting issues? So there's a few different tips that can be employed to actually come up with what voting issues you're going to use. And then later on in this video, we'll talk about how that would actually look in a round. But how do you come up with your basic voting issues? There are a couple strategies again with this. One strategy that I really like to use when I would debate was to just lay out during my prep time was lay out all the arguments, or not, sorry, not during my prep time. I apologize. So one strategy that I really liked was to just, in my last rebuttal speech, just lay out all the arguments during the rebuttal like I normally would, and then I'd quickly present 3 voting issues during the last 60 seconds or so of the speech, and those voting issues would sum up the reasons why I thought I should win with those 3 main voting issues, kind of like a TLDR for the judge, I guess. So I'd go through my rebuttal speech like normal, but I'd keep an eye on my timer, and basically when I hit 1 minute left on the clock, I would stop what I was doing, stop giving my rebuttal speech, and I just use that final minute to go into voting issues. And usually I'd say something like, all right, Judge, now that all that's out of the way, I want to end this round end this speech by presenting 3 main voting issues or 3 reasons why I believe an affirmative or negative position ballot is warranted. And then I'd go into them. And we'll get to an example in a sec. So that's one good strategy. Another good strategy that I often found really useful was to follow some kind of syllogism pattern for my voting issues. So let's look at an example. So say I'm debating the resolution, nationalism ought to be valued above globalism. Say that I'm on the side of nationalism. Say that I have a value of purpose of government. So what I might do is say something like, all right, Judge, now I want to present 3 voting issues or 3 reasons why I believe an affirmative ballot is warranted. My first voting issue is purpose of government is the highest value of the round. Purpose of government is the highest value of the round. And then I take a few seconds to explain why this was the case. I'd reference the previous arguments in the round. I'd be like, Judge, I presented this value. My opponent countered with this, but then I brought up this example. And at the end of the round, you can see that purpose of government, which is my value, is the highest value. Second voting issue, nationalism upholds the purpose of government. Nationalism upholds the purpose of government. And again, I would explain why, and I would reference the arguments that happened in the round. I'd be like, Judge, these are the arguments that I brought up in my case, and my opponent tried to say this, but I showed how he's wrong, and nationalism upholds the purpose of government, which is my value. And then my third voting issue might be globalism does not uphold the purpose of government. And again, I'd explain why. I'd reference the arguments in the round. So those are basically 3 voting issues that I would run in a resolution like that. And as you can see, those look a lot like what my contentions might have been in my original case. In fact, they might exactly be what my contentions would be. But look at what I'm doing here. I'm telling the judge, look, first I showed you during this round that my value is highest. Also, I showed you during this round that my side achieves my value. And finally, I showed you that my opponent's side doesn't. That's what the round boils down to. And that's why you should vote for me. You're basically saying, Judge, forget about everything else in the round. These are the important arguments. This is why you should vote for me. Plain and simple. So how does this look in a debate? How do you present your voting issues smoothly in your rebuttal? So again, there's a couple strategies. One strategy is, like I mentioned, what I like to do is just leave 60 seconds at the end of my rebuttal speech, give my rebuttal like normal, leave 60 seconds at the end, and use that 60 seconds to quickly go over my voting issue. Confining yourself to those 60 seconds also ensures that your voting issues will be concise and short, which is good because that's what you want it to be for the judge to understand, because remember, you're simplifying it. Another strategy that you could do is to just weave the voting issues around the arguments that are already in your last rebuttal speech. So just take the arguments that you were already going to make in your speech anyway, and during your prep time, just organize each of them under a voting issue. Just use the voting issue. Think of it like a category or a heading or a fancy overarching tag for groups of arguments in your rebuttal. So, if you look down at your flow and you see, oh, I have a lot of arguments about my value, then voting issue 1 can be the value clash, and you can talk about why you won and present all those arguments, and then do the same thing for voting issue number 2. You're just taking the arguments you already have, and you're grouping them together, and you're placing them into 3 categories, and then those are your 3 voting issues. And as you're going through those arguments in that organized way, you're just kind of giving the voting issue as just an overarching, theme for all of those arguments, I guess. So that's definitely a good strategy as well. And you'll find that a lot of times your voting issues will be the same round to round, assuming that you have the same resolution. So you could even kind of pre-prepare voting issues. And again, they may look a lot like your contentions. And you'll find that oftentimes that's what you would want. You probably will want to vary this from round to round. Some specific rounds, maybe there's one specific round where based on the nature of your cases and the arguments, there's one voting issue that isn't like a generic one that can be pre-prepared, but it's specific to that round, and you can bring that up, or maybe in another round, one of the generic voting issues that you prepared doesn't really apply, and you can drop that one. So, you ideally you'll want to be doing this kind of on the fly, but you can pre-prepare some common ones to use, which will probably look kind of similar to your contentions. So yeah, that's basically voting issues. And the reason I say this is a more intermediate topic is voting issues are not necessary. They're not required for you to win a debate. You can absolutely win a debate without using voting issues and just debating like normal without presenting them. So they're not required at all. I got to nationals my first 2 years. I didn't start using voting issues until my third or fourth year, but I got to nationals before that without using voting issues at all. So it's not required, but it is something that is very helpful, especially for your judge. And if your judge is confused and you find a way to simplify the round for them while pointing to the fact that the idea that you should win, that can oftentimes really, really help. And having voting issues and boiling down the round and making it simple, oftentimes that can be the difference between winning and losing. So it's not required, but it's something that's very helpful. And so I hope that this video was helpful. And if you have any other ideas or any thoughts about what other videos I should make and post to the channel, let me know down in the comments. And yeah, I will see you next time. Thanks.